Hey there, Judy Hu here, trauma therapist turned boundary coach, and I am with my good friend and colleague, Leah. And I we're starting this because it's a little bit of a dumpster fire right now,
Mhm.
and we're offering this as a gift of a way to frame everything, right? So for me, when I feel like I am really lost, having a map to understand, oh, this is the general direction of where I am lost and where I want to go. And so having that context or that frame is really helpful. So that's why we're here. And I wanted to talk about our origin story. So I think it was 2009. Is
That sounds right.
Okay.
Yep.
I was working at an organization, an outpatient clinic in Cambridge, and the specialty at the clinic was working with complex blended families. So families formed through adoption and foster care. And it was incredible work and a lot of work around core wounding and trauma, right? So, what do I mean by that? Adoption is based on loss. And so we had wonderful training around the implications of what happens when families start that way. So I had the blessing of being Leah's intern trainer.
Mhm.
But what I love about these cycles is after I left that organization, because I completely burned out, it was at one point, it was literally the choice of do I live or do I sacrifice myself to the
Mm.
agency? I think a lot of mental health counselors can relate to this,
Mhm.
or helping professions can relate to this utter burnout.
Yeah.
And I think in the last few years, 2 years maybe, Leah and I reconnected. We've always been in touch, but I had reached out to Leah particularly for, I wanted to know a little bit more about the work that you were doing because there was a resonance around ketamine therapy.
Mm.
So teacher turned student is now how I sit with Leah, where I'm learning so much from her experience with the work that she does. And together, I think we're emerging something, and I think it's really special. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I always have a hard time with this part because I'm like, where do I even start? Because my professional world is just, yeah, I've just been engaged in a lot, which has been beautiful and wonderful, and also so mind-blowing that I've dabbled and dabbled in all of these worlds. So my background is in expressive arts therapies and mental health counseling. And then most recently, I have training in somatic work and IFS and ketamine assisted psychotherapy, and then a cannabis model called psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy. And then I also just finished my certificate in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. I have a lot of background in merging the medicine space with traditional therapy. And then also, I think a huge part of my journey has been spiritual. And I have some background in shamanic studies and background in other types of energy healing practices. And along the way, I've really tried to find my own unique path as it's connected to my ancestral lineage through those worlds, right? So I know that for me, there is a connection to shamanism ancestrally. It's been a journey and understanding what I can claim and what is not mine to claim, and then where to honor other lineages that I have participated in. That also has widened my world in the decolonial colonial space, and even wider in thinking about ancestrally the concept of colonizer and colonized and persecutor and persecuted, which we'll talk a lot about today. And so I guess I just wanted to lay the foundation for all of that because I see ways in which all of this collides for people. I see it a lot in my practice. I saw it a lot in my work with Judy through ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And yeah, and then I've been like diving full-fledged into another layer of my own ancestral healing work. Yeah. So that's where I'm at in a nutshell and who I am in a nutshell. And just really happy to be here with you today. Yeah.
So where do we start? How are you feeling now that we just did this intro?
Good.
How's
I
your body
actually feel
feeling?
really grounded in that.
Good.
I usually start to panic with this sort of stuff.
Why is that?
There's just something about being literally on camera that never sits super well with me. But for some reason, I actually feel very grounded in that today. So yeah, we'll see how I do later. But yeah.
So Leah and I were talking a while about, do we start a podcast or what are we doing? So we're just testing this out because I don't know about you, Leah, like so much is coming in from the collective energetic field, like historical stuff. Like the stuff that's coming out in my groups and with my individual clients are quote unquote crazy. Like you can't make up what's coming up and how it all fits together. And I really was called to do this just unpacking and processing of what we've been doing together because I really think it would help other people because something I say every day to myself and to my clients I work with, nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with them. What's the data telling us? So it's, I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. What's happening between us, basically.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk a little bit about like last week or where we've been with your journey or how do we do this?
Yeah, sure.
So when I came over, I've been sitting with a lot of rage. The political context is the administration had recently said, we're going to pause all the federal funding. And my mind immediately went to starvation because that's where my ancestral damage, collective trauma sits because of the Cultural Revolution and what happened during that time of people just throwing each other under the bus and just the mass starvation that happened. So when I heard it, I just got just wailing and rage because I could see the bodies in my mind, right? So how I work is I see the past as the present because it informs my next steps. Because for me, it's like, how do we clear it so we don't keep repeating it? So how am I doing? I am grateful that I'm channeling my rage in this way because I think without this frame, it would make me crazy or it would make me take it out on the bodies of my kids. My heart feels raw, but it's beating. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah. So I think it would also be helpful to share with people a little bit more about my social location before I dive in. So a little background, my social location. I'm a white cis hetero woman. I've always been told I'm ethnically ambiguous, and especially people seeing me on video, I always just want to make sure people know I am white, even though I have definitely had lots of people ask me the very common, sadly common question of, what are you? I've gotten that a lot of my life. Yeah, so I want to put that out there. And a lot of my ancestry that I am aware of is mainly European. My grandmother, my great grandmother and grandfather immigrated to the US on my mom's side, maternal side from Germany. And my dad's grandparents also immigrated from Germany. Story-wise, I've always been told I have a lot of German heritage, which makes sense. But when you follow the lines back, a lot of my ancestors came from England, Ireland, Scotland, and then Scandinavia, and then slowly made their way to the US. And I've always felt like there's a lot of really interesting ancestral stuff that was percolating inside of me that I couldn't quite latch onto. It just felt very nebulous. And I think for a lot of us that are white that have really extended histories here in the US, it can be really hard to start tracking those lines back for other people as well. But I think white Americans that have long generations of ancestors that have been here, it can take a while to trace that. So I was finding myself in that realm of not quite understanding everything there was to know about my ancestry. And then I was finishing my psychedelic program in November, and I went through an experiential training with holotropic breath work. And at the end of that training, I had an activation of restless leg syndrome. And for those of you that don't know, that's basically your muscles start spasming, and the only way to start to release that is to actually contract and release your muscles. And sometimes your legs will involuntarily kick out. I don't quite have it that severe, but my mom does. And here's where it gets interesting, is like it follows my entire maternal line. Yes, genetics are a thing, but it felt connected to something feminine. And at the end of my breathwork session, I told our facilitators, this thing happened. I know from a neurobiological standpoint, it's a dopamine response. Can you tell me about like how breathwork interacts with dopamine? And my facilitators at the time said, we really think of restless leg as psychosomatic. And I was like, yeah, actually I just haven't been able to dig into the meat of what this means for me.
Yeah.
And so then fast forward to early January, I had a night where my restless leg syndrome was very bad. Could not get it to calm down. I couldn't sleep. And so I thought, instead of just doing what I usually do, which is to try to physically calm it with heat or magnesium lotion, sometimes even Advil for whatever reason will settle it, I was like, why don't I just go into this?
Yes.
I'm just going to go into it and I'm going to be with it more from a somatic experiencing IFS perspective. And I heard two things. I heard 7 generations and I heard the country Latvia. And that took me on a journey into my maternal lineage. And then I heard very clearly, and I literally felt like it was your father's side was persecuting your mother's side. And I felt like that was really striking to me because I could literally feel the divide in my body. For those of you that subscribe to this or can understand this in any way, a lot of times the left side of the body is connected with feminine energy. And again, this isn't specifically gendered, right?
Yes.
But feminine energy and then the masculine energy being on the right side of the body. And I could literally feel that split down my body. And my restless leg syndrome only shows up on my left side. So I text my mom and I ask her, what side does your restless leg usually show up on? Guess what she says?
Left side.
Left side. And I'm
like, so when I work with people, it's like we zoom out and then we zoom back in. I remember when Leah was talking to me about the restless leg and I was like, what side is it on? And then we started riffing on it. The reason why, so when you have a psychosomatic experience in your body, it's literally your body trying to ask for some attention, right? So it's a similar thing of if you're overexerted at the end of finals, you just get sick. Like it's the body just trying to get some attention or some care. And so what I've been noticing as I do more and more ancestral clearing for people is that physical symptoms are breadcrumbs into where to look. So Leah just shared this example of restless leg. Instead of trying to suppress it, she went into it. So it's literally trauma work is you go through it, and on the other end, you can digest it and find the nugget so you can release it, because trauma is just a frozen memory that needs a little digestion and a positive outcome of it so that the body can release, because it feels like it can keep itself safe, right? So if trauma is still in there, it's frozen in the body with the belief that I am not safe. And that's why trauma processing is so important. And so the somatic work that Leah is talking about is trusting the body to guide you where it needs to go. And so now zooming back into Leah's story, okay, is she got these nuggets, right? The reason why I'm pausing for the folks who are listening is do this. If you have asthma all the time, that's lungs, that's unprocessed grief. Look for the grief. Sit with it, right? If you have anxiety, sit with it. Go, what am I afraid of? Where does it originate? And if it's super intense, like you cannot sleep or you cannot function, it's likely generational, right? Leah says 7 generations back. I am not surprised, right? At what point has society been peaceful or enough for everybody? Never, right? So if you think about it, the epigenetic impact of trauma on the body, generations after generations, it makes sense that we have all of this chronic illness.
Yeah.
Because no one's ever have had a chance to process.
Clear it out. Yeah.
Why? Why have we not had the space or the support or the understanding of why we need to clear this out? Because then we just keep going on survival mode and we work within the system that just needs us to be head down and barely surviving.
Yep, that's right. It just keeps us complicit in the systems
Yes,
that are working for sadly the 1%. I'm just gonna say it.
it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Yeah. And for me, it's really interesting having done so much somatic work with other people. Oh, why have I thought about to actually go into this specific thing for myself? Why had I not? It was just that curiosity of, oh, why did that never cross my mind? But that night it was like, all right, I'm gonna dig into this. And that would not have happened, like you said, without the breadcrumb of it arriving at the very end of my holotropic breathwork journey, which for me was also a very clear indicator. By the way, that whole journey, I had there's some ancient technology showing up in my body. That was like the very beginning portion of the breathwork for me. And then I was dropped into my world trauma, like life trauma here. And then the restless leg syndrome showed up. So it was really interesting to go from like past life ancient technology and embodied wisdom and really feeling the strength in that. And then to, oh shit, now here I am in this world and this life experiencing some pretty intense earthly trauma. Anyway, I'm able to pick up some more information about my mom's side, which has been helpful and interesting. And then all of a sudden, I was like, I just really feel like I need to understand more about my dad's side. Now that I'm understanding and hearing this message about, did my father's side persecute my mother's side? And so I reach out to my aunt, who's considered the family genealogist on that side. And she sends me an ancestry.com link and is like, all the information I have is here. Feel free to go through it, which was amazing. Thank gosh for her and her curiosity about our family. And I was looking through the documents and I came across one that said Salem Witch Trials. And I was just like, what? Because I spend a lot of time in Salem. I go there several times a year. There's a lot of intense energy there, but there's a lot that I love about it that feels really interesting in my body, mind, and soul. And I think it's just wild to now look back and be like, oh, interesting.
This is why.
Might be why. Yeah. Long story short, I find out that I have an ancestor on my dad's side that was one of the 4 men that had actually accused 2 of the women, Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, during the Salem Witch Trials. And both of them were killed. They were both hung on Gallows Hill in Salem. And when I learned that, I just was astounded. As you can imagine, it was like, the other thing I missed here too is like my mom's side has a deeply spiritual connection, and my mom ended up going through like a spiritual awakening that was pretty profound when I was a teenager. And so it's just interesting thinking about whether we want to call it witch, healer, psychic, clairvoyant, channeler, right? Anything within that realm, like that was basically my mom. And I do think that goes back on my mom's side. And so here we are. Here I am with an ancestor on my dad's side who was a persecutor.
Yes.
And here I am with knowing the gifts on my mom's side. And then also thinking about just the wounding of those of us that have been really called into spiritual realms and felt oppressed.
Yes.
The feeling in my body, other than there was a truth and a knowing of, oh yeah, this actually feels really spot on. Like just a knowing in my body.
That there was a persecutor.
Yeah. Like that the story was lived within me, quite literally, on my DNA.
So this experience is actually much more common than we realize, right? So when I start with someone, I always get their DNA or their genogram. So it's a map of their family. And then I ask where people are from, literally their land story, because land has memory. And so where we come from also has data of, oh, they were born on this land around this time, so then they're going to be impacted by World War I based on X, Y, and Z, right? So we make up stories. And the reason why we make up stories is we don't know for sure, but our body always knows.
Yes.
So you said something, Leah, that was so beautiful. It just resonated as truth, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason why I want to pause here is when we think of perpetrator, oftentimes we judge, especially if we have the experience of being marginalized and harmed, right? This is one of the main reasons why it is so hard for the United States to process the truth of the matter of what happened on this land, Turtle Island, because there is a resistance to acknowledging that there was perpetration, there was oppression, there was genocide.
Yes.
When we cannot admit the truth because we drop into shame, we cannot heal it. And so the reason why I want to pause here and just name it is the basis of my work is everyone's equal, regardless of the behavior, regardless of the action and the impact of how many people died, right? Yes, there should be accountability, but the essence of the person as a human being will always be unconditionally lovable in same size to someone else. If we take that value of the person away and just look at the behavior with neutrality, we can process so much more and hold people accountable for the behavior without demeaning or vilifying. So, Leah, when you told me about it, I remember the intensity on your face, because I also know how called you are and have been to social justice work. You did a lot of my educating of, oh, go there. And I did a lot of my decolonizing because of the work that you've been doing. So the story I make up is when you realize that there's this persecutor in your lineage, that there was a little bit of a heartbreak or betrayal. How does that land?
Yeah, totally. For me, it was like, I think because I have been on this journey, I was able to hold it with less judgment than I would have 5 years ago. Sure. And still there was the sting of, oh shit, my ancestor really literally hung to innocent women. Like that to me is very heartbreaking. If I just sit with that portion, right? Like how horrific that all of these people in Salem were murdered for essentially coming back to the land, and we can say more about this later, is basically because of land disputes and town rivalry and confusion. There was a ton of confusion. And yeah, of course, there was that sting of, And also, I think at this point in my own journey, I was able to not hold quite as much judgment, but it was still there, of course, especially when you don't know the full story. Right. And here's where things start to get really interesting with my ancestor. So his name was Henry Keeney, and he was born in England. And his parents, when he was young, actually fled England with him to Holland because of religious persecution. So at that time in England, my understanding is that there was a need to conform to being Protestant, otherwise your life was threatened. So very specific religious genocide happening there, essentially. And so they fled to Holland, and then he came over with an apprentice at the age of 12. So one of the things that indicates to me is his family was not well off if he was coming over at the age of 12 as an apprentice. We don't know what he was apprenticing for, but later on records indicate that he was a farmer. There's a lot about planting, so I assume farming. And so here you have a story about someone whose own family fled religious persecution and then becomes the persecutor themselves. And this is the message I keep getting over and over again, whether it is from my spiritual guides, from my ancestors, is we need to be really looking at our shadows. Where can all of us become persecutor and persecuted?
Yes.
Where does our DNA hold those signatures of both being persecuted and persecutor?
Yes.
And how do we rectify that? How do we work with that energy? And then knowing the land also holds that, back to Judy's point. I've been really also researching a lot and trying to understand more about ley lines. And here in the US, really the reference is energy, earth energy lines. I think ley lines are supposed to be more like origin is in the UK. And so bringing the phrase ley lines over here is very frustrating to them. So
Interesting.
I think a lot of people understand earth energy as ley lines, but I also want to be specific. That feels almost like like we think of closed practices, almost like a closed practice to the UK. And here they're earth energy lines. Or that's the way they've been referenced. Salem is a hotbed for earth energy.
Oh, can I just,
Yeah.
so how Leah explained it to me and it lands is, so earth energy lines or ley lines is if the planet Earth were a body and you have meridians, right? So ancient Eastern medicine is there's meridian lines for energy within the body, right? And it's the same on the land or in the earth. And so again, how do we look at everything as though it were just a layer, right? So when a client comes to me about something, I go, okay, let's zoom out and then let's zoom in slowly. And we look at the layers, like your personal experience, your family's experience, the collective experience, the global experience.
Yeah.
So the more you can go in and out, you can collect so much context and information and understanding. Again, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm just getting data. And so now we land in Salem where there is a lot of historical trauma.
A lot of historical trauma. Yeah. So Judy and I actually went to Salem on Saturday, along with another good friend of mine. And I was so grateful to Judy for especially after I shared with you, this is what's coming up. And you're like, can I come? I was very grateful that both of them could be there and that Judy was so excited to be a part of this with me. Yeah, and having your energy there was really special. So thank you again for that. And so I knew the cemetery where he was buried in an unmarked grave. And so we all went. And at that point, I didn't know it was unmarked. So we were looking for the tombstone. And I just had this feeling of, I had been walking around enough. And I was like, I just think it's an unmarked grave. And then I think it was Christabeth looked at a blog that had his name listed and was like, oh, it says literally unmarked grave. And I was like, okay, this is why we can't find him. It was just interesting, like all of us tuning into the field there and the energy there. And we all picked up different but very connected energy signatures. I felt a lot of bickering, a lot of confusion. Yeah, and a lot of unsettled energy. Those were the three themes I was picking up on a lot. And then Judy picked up on a really interesting energy signature there.
So when I sat with it, I got the image of like very cold, very hungry, and very angry. And so what landed for me was, I think everyone on the ships that came over were lied to. That this new world that was promised to be this huge opportunity was way harder than they realized. They were not fully given consent. And so it's interesting because when different people feel into the field or the energy imprints or blueprints or whatever it is, based on the nervous system experience, this is how I understand it, you're going to pick up on a different resonance. So for me, my history from China is this mass starvation, right? And so what came very strongly in when I was in Salem was they were starving, they were freezing, and they were terrified. And some of that terror got manifested and diverted onto native bodies, the bodies of women and the bodies of children, because they could not take it out on the people who actually lied to them. Because they couldn't go home and and the people who lied to them were the people in power and the people who had money. And so if we zoom out, this is a historical context of how people immigrate to the US, this land of opportunity, right? So for the Asian American history, when the Chinese were brought in, it was like the roads are paved in gold. There's so much opportunity. And these men came, signed away their like came. And it was like, oops, by the way, you're the ones building the roads, the railroads. And so it was like, oh, this is an echo of the past over and over again, where those in power who are going to benefit the most from these lies keep tricking us. And we keep believing them.
Yeah.
And so again, it was like, oh, this context lands so squarely in the context of the world right now, the politics right now, right? There was a lot of lying, and we're seeing now the consequence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That certain people who are in power have lied, and now the fear and the anger is getting displaced onto the wrong bodies yet again.
Yeah. And I think that actually is where the more raw emotion lands for me is, wow, my story, like literally the story that lives in my DNA is the micro of the macro. I think I'm saying that, those two
I know
things
what you
around.
mean.
But I just was like, wow, that's really striking. What are the chances that the story would show up in my life when literally this is center stage on the world right now?
Yes.
Oof. And so I think Judy and I are both like, how can we keep this from happening? That's the bottom line. How can we stop history from repeating itself in the ways that have been so harmful? And one of the ways for me that we worked with when we went to Salem was like doing a lot of connection work with his energy of, okay, I understand now more what happened here and why you felt like you had to do what you had to do to survive, essentially. And I don't accept that behavior, but I can have empathy for where you are coming from and for your story and hold you in that. I think that was a really powerful moment for me. And then we went from there to where the victims were. And there's a whole story around Salem not being quite sure for a very long time where specifically the people were murdered. But I know for a fact we were in that vicinity very clearly.
Yeah.
And also one specific part of it, we could feel the intensity of the energy of the land. And I don't know if you want to speak to what you were feeling up on Gallows Hill, but that was really powerful.
It was so intense. So there, up on Gallows Hill, it felt very stagnant energy, like dead, energy that couldn't move. And there is a flagpole there, and it was at half mast, which is basically every day in the US, considering all the stuff that happens. And so when I stood there and felt in, I had this embodied rage, and it also felt like bloodthirst. And so I started kicking the base of the flagpole, and the rage exited my body. And the statement that kept coming out was, look at what you made me do. Look at what you made me do. You lied to me. And so that tapped into the energy of all of the people who joined the military, thinking that it's to serve and protect.
Yeah.
And then at some point realizing it's actually to plunder and pillage and take over and murder.
Yeah.
And then they are culpable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were lied to.
Yeah.
And that just kept coming forward of, what have you made me do? At what cost? Why? And that bloodthirst of, there's not enough. It was so intense. And I think we had to join hands or something, because it was just, I couldn't get it out of my body and I couldn't ground it.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to do this work, something really important is you do not hold the energy. Do not hold the energy. It's toxic. Okay. So if you're to imagine your body as a lightning rod, where you ground into the earth and you release the energy in. Okay. And if it's too much, like what happened, you want to ground with people who are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like discharging it.
Yeah.
Right. Static electricity or something. It just like goes through and makes it less intense.
Yeah.
So this is how you exit that energy when you pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what had happened in that moment was me saying, I feel like we just need to send a lot of love out to this. And then you had the idea of, can we put our backs together and send it out that way? And that's when we grounded in and then just sent out a lot of loving energy the best we could to that place.
Mhm.
And the other thing I really felt there that connected with Judy's picking up of the field of stagnant energy is, to me, there was an energy vortex there. And when I sense these things, what I see the energy doing is this. It's just staying in one place and it's cycling the same feelings, the same experiences, the same perpetual energy over and over again. And I could feel that there were layers of harm that had been done on that land, not just connected to the witch trials. Yeah, and I know you could too. And to Judy's piece around veterans, right? It's in my psychedelic program, one of my favorite, and I will admit some of my own bias here because I was just like, oh, I don't know that this is how I'm gonna feel about this. But we had a whole day where we sat with 3 veterans and we learned about moral injury. And it was one of the most profound days, and like really makes me emotional when I think about it, actually. One of the most profound days of my training, because they spoke to exactly what you said.
Yes.
How they needed to go in and do these things on their officer's watch, so to speak, that they did not agree with.
Yes.
And some of that included killing people. And that takes a toll on the soul, on the spirit. And for those of us that believe in past lifetimes and reincarnation, the way that karmic energy continues throughout lifetimes, right? Or through ancestral lineages as well. Yeah. And I later learned that on that specific park, they don't think that's actually where the women were, or the people, I should say, because there were some men that were killed in the Salem Witch Trials also, but where the people were killed, we could still feel the layers of harmful energy there. And I later learned that some people have gone up there and taken their lives as well, which also speaks to that vortex of energy and the stagnant energy there.
I was sharing this story with my cycle breaker group, and one of the participants grew up in Salem. And when I described the bickering, she was like, or they were like, oh my God, that lands so much, because there was so much bickering, constant bickering. And one of the questions was, do you think the bickering happened because of what happened on the land, or like which came first, basically? And I'm curious how it lands for you. I was like, I think it's both. When you go somewhere and you're like, I'm called to be here, and it just resonates or something. I think that is part of the charge too, of if we are living on a land that has this much destruction, we're going to be able to feel it. Like it's going to call us maybe to be destructive. And there might be some energetic familiarity ancestrally that calls us to that place too.
Yeah.
So I think it was both.
Yeah.
What's your thought?
Yeah, I think it can be either or both, depending on the person and their experiences, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely have felt that part of my own medicine journey experience has been that I'm dropped in these energy vortexes. And so that's been really interesting. Like, why do those keep showing up in my journeys?
Yes.
And ones that I never even understood until recently. I remember maybe my 5th ketamine journey, I was dropped into the Great Wall of China. And I was like, why am I on the Great Wall of China? Hadn't watched anything, hadn't read anything. And I remember my facilitator at the time, we were giggling about it. You're in the Great Wall of China. And I'm like, yeah, they're hot air balloons. And come to find out, they actually do hot air balloon rides over the Great Wall of China. And it's also a deadly earthline energy, because there are many bodies, sadly, that were buried or somehow put into the walls of the Great Wall of China, because sadly a lot of people died in the creation process of the Great Wall of China. And it's just been interesting to see how I keep getting called into these vortexes of energy. And I do think for me it's an ancestral and potentially past lifetime connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
Because why else would that be showing up for me? But then I'm in these. Salem was a vortex.
And it's interesting too, because one of the ketamine journeys that I was on, that Leah assisted me with, dropped me in a past life that explained why I'm in Boston area and having a experience as an Indigenous person, and so informing why I feel this intense call for social justice. to try to alchemize the harm that has happened energetically in my lineage.
Yeah.
And so something that came forward very strongly when I was in Salem with you was when I was feeling into that cold, starving, and bickering energy, it was also this empathy of, I don't know what I would do if I was starving and I had to choose between my family and someone else's,
Yeah.
right? It gave me so much empathy for my mom, who I have a complicated relationship with. I actually don't know what I would do if I were in her shoes. And so that kind of softened my heart, again, reminding me like, I cannot judge. I can and I will hold accountable, right? Because to acknowledge this level of harm is part of the healing process. Like going to Gallows Hill and beaming that light out was, I honor your fates. I honor all of the lives that were lost here. And how I honor that and I hold that within my consciousness so we can alchemize it and metabolize it and hopefully bring in a better, in the sense of more peaceful, more authentic, more accountable life so that everyone can live.
Yeah.
There's enough for everyone right now. That's the part that's just so enraging to me, is that we keep fighting over something that should be a basic right.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah.
So where are you sitting now that you've been back for? It's
Mm.
only been a few days.
Been
This
a
stuff
few
is
days.
so much.
I know, it's been so much. I think now I'm like integrating what do I want to share with the rest of the world about this? And one is what we did there to honor the aspects of those dynamics and those people and the land. And, you know, we left offerings as well at each site that we went to. And we also went to the memorial that Salem had finally put up, where they believe that is their best guess now based on historical data. That's where the people were hung. So we left offerings there as well. And I just feel like that was really, all of that was really meaningful and rich in terms of the ritual. And like you, I love that you've been using the word alchemizing. So it felt, it was just a very alchemizing day, a very healing day in that way. I think we did a lot of honoring of people's souls and lived experiences, and I was able to release, I think, any of the lingering judgment that I had for Henry as I learned more about his story. And now I'm back to the point of like, how do I not repeat that cycle? And that was one of the things I really sat in with him and his energy when I was present with him at the cemetery. And what I kept feeling was like, especially where there's so much fear, understandable fear happening here in the US right now. I think what's so tricky about fear is how much of a slippery slope it can be. And that in Salem, I think, is really such a prime example of that, right? There was so much fear about things being taken. So land, for instance, there was fear that there was actually witchcraft happening. Henry himself was having what he'd call amazing fits, which fit the description of people that were saying they were having seizures and believing that that was coming from witchcraft, from people in the village. And so the fear just kept perpetuating itself to the point where people were reacting and not. And that to me is like a huge lesson here also.
Yes.
Is recognizing the fear when it's there and understanding why it's present and valid, because 9 times out of 10, it's completely rational, right? It's just then about how do we recenter ourselves and look at what are the facts that are actually happening right now in this moment.
Yes.
Am I safe right now in this room, in this place?
Right.
With Judy, with my dog in the other room, with, right, grounding myself in the moment, recentering myself however I can do that. And I think everybody's got to find a unique practice for them. And then how do I now respond instead of react from that place? Because what happens when we are in reaction is we point fingers and we gossip and we
blame,
we rat people out, we, right? It's just like
betray.
It's one thing after another. And yeah, and we see that happening. We saw that happen with the Holocaust. People were often, and again, I am not blaming them, but there was often this sense of we need to give people up to save ourselves.
Yes.
And that is such a difficult place to be.
Yes.
That's a very extreme variation of this. But witch trials that was happening with the witch trials as well.
Same thing in
Palestine and
the inability to be able to hold the truth without vilifying is what kept this going so much.
Yeah.
I couldn't have conversations with my friends and colleagues about what was happening in Gaza because it was this, but do you see why? And it's, yes, I see why. And this is happening right now. And the threat is not what you think it is, right? And something that came up in the group that just resonates right now is who benefits from paranoia, right? One of the tactics from the ruling class is do not believe the news.
Yeah.
You cannot trust the facts, right? And so this like whispering or gossiping or bickering or blaming or throwing each other under the bus actually most benefits those in the 1%. So understanding if I have this rage and I'm about to take it out on this body, pause and go, nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with them. What's the data telling me? I am feeling helpless right now. Why? Because federal funds are being frozen. Okay, who's doing that? And follow those breadcrumbs very carefully and mindfully and grounded. It will lead you to the truth.
Yeah.
But if you react too quickly, you're just going to throw the mess around and someone else is going to have to clean it up. So the more you clear out your own generational, your own ancestral legacies and burdens, the slower you can move, the more grounded you can be, the more capacity you can have for creative solutions rather than just attacking other people.
Yeah.
I think another part for me too is I have dedicated my life trying to convince people who don't want to see the truth.
Yeah.
And so now, just like I had empathy from what I picked up around, like I can't judge people for what they're doing. I can hold them accountable, but I can't judge and vilify, is the same thing. If there are people who don't want to see the truth, I'm going to stop wasting my time. I'm going to just keep doing my work, not pause it on anything. I'm going to continue living in joy and in abundance. And I'm going to naturally attract those who are ready to do that work and who understand it. But I'm not going to keep butting my head up against, why are they doing this?
Right.
We know why. Power.
Definitely do.
So don't waste the energy. It's so limited.
And I'll give you a really specific example of that popped up this week. As I'm sure so many people are feeling, things are just absolutely on fire and everything feels urgent because a lot of it is. And so I've been getting a lot of texts from people in my life. I need help processing this. How do I respond to this? What can I do? Can you believe this person said this thing? What do I do? A lot of that because we're all so activated right now and coming from that place of reaction. And I saw a post where someone had said they were really scared and really wanted support. And sadly, some people were like, there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. And it's ridiculous that anybody would be fearing this, and just very dismissive. And in that moment, so easy to just want to go to the person that said that and be like, you don't get it. Like, you don't freaking get it. And I'll be very clear. I think there is a time and a place for that. I do. And that was a reaction on my part to someone that was doubling down and probably never going to understand what I was trying to explain to them. And then I realized, oh, things feel a lot more clear when I just respond to the person that posted. How can I be in my love and my centered self and respond to the person that actually needed the support?
Yes.
That was a response. I don't need to go here, right? Let my response be a model for other people that may be hopefully even slightly curious about responding differently or have a little bit more of an open heart that can take this in, right? How can I model while still supporting the person that needed it, not responding in a reactive way to this person that was probably not going to get it? So that feels like a very clear example of what you're describing.
And another way, what is my work to do?
Yeah.
And I think, again, that goes back to ancestral patterns of what can I do that's going to be different so I can break the cycle here.
Yeah.
So rather than try to like bicker or try to convince everyone, it's just you need my support, the person who's being persecuted. What can I do to support you?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
What is my work to do? Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that phrase. I feel like it crosses many realms, right? Because it's like, what is my work to do? Like, how am I actually showing up for other people work? And then also, what is the work to do for me?
Yes.
For my own healing. Like I had an experience earlier this week where I was dropped into some of my own trauma response, and it allowed me to see another layer of my healing that I am ready to step into. Without having had that reaction, I wouldn't have seen the other layer or had that experience. And I do feel like collectively, this is a year of the snake for the Chinese New Year and Lunar New Year. And it's the wood snake, right? Is there anything you want to say specifically about that energy?
No, I don't know. I don't keep track of it.
Okay.
Do you have anything?
So, I mean, I think snakes in general, and I have heard this about the wood snake also, but I'm always curious if there's more specificity to it based on culture. But snakes are always about shedding. They're always about transformation. And this is the year where we're really being asked to shed. We're really being asked to look at what is needing to be healed collectively, so we do not repeat this. Aquarius and now Pluto, for those of you that are, Pluto and Aquarius, for those of you that are astrologically oriented, as well as this week, just yesterday being the new moon in Aquarius, is also asking us to step into the greater good for humanity. So what's really interesting is we have all of these energies from different cultures and backgrounds supporting our collective liberation.
Yes.
While the patriarchy is trying to oppress all of it down.
Yes.
So to me, that is fascinating. And I feel like what's really cool is there is a universal energy supporting our process in this. And that's, you just can't make that up. It's just wild to me.
Yes, and that's what makes it fun for me. Sometimes I used to be in a place of, oh my God, how much more healing do I need to do? Whereas now I'm like, oh, with this framing of all I need to do is follow the breadcrumbs. That's it. I'm going to clear out stuff as it comes, because if my life is meant to go in this direction and then there's an obstacle or something that's charging in me, I clear that one piece out and then I keep moving forward. So I don't keep staying in the old mired stuff.
Yeah.
I don't try to change anyone's mind. I just honor the truth and I keep moving forward. And so that's the frame of, if I know there's nothing wrong with me and there's nothing wrong with others, what is this data telling me? That's the small piece, right? And I can feel in my body the shedding. I love that image. And this growing capacity as I shed. So as I have been doing all of this like boundary healing work, ancestral clearing work, my body feels so large in capacity for what I need to do.
Yeah.
And it's so much faster. I have so much more energy. I have so much clarity when things happen, that I have so much hope. Sometimes I feel a little crazy about how much hope that I have, but I have so much hope that we have an opportunity at this moment to do it differently. And I think that's true every single moment to moment. How can I do this differently?
Yeah.
What do our ancestors want me to do differently so that their sacrifices, their pain, their burdens, I don't repeat?
So much goodness here. I'm just like, yeah. And I think I just want to end with saying too, I do not take this stuff lightly. I think it's interesting. Like I am sitting here feeling like pretty grounded and pretty centered, and I'm grateful for that. And this has not been my entire journey, right? There have been moments where I am crying, the moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, can I even take a shamanism course and feel like that's within a right of mine, and unpacking that and understanding that and looking at my own ancestry. And there have been times where I've, I think my point here is like just to consistently be in deep questioning and humility.
Yes.
And I think humility has gotten a really bad rep lately.
Say more.
Where I think, and understandably, again, when we think about the shadow and wounding, where it's, oh, if you're a woman that is, especially a cis woman that is humble, you are not seeing your worth. So humility is like, it's almost become like a dirty,
I see.
has like a dirty connotation. And I understand that it was coming from a place of good intention. Of let's boost women because we've been oppressed for so long, right? So again, there's that duality happening again. I'm obsessed with etymology, and what's so cool to me is that humility, when you break it down, it comes from the word humus, which means earth. And one of the ways that I have started to hold the word is humility is allowing me to see you and myself and honor both at the same time.
Yes.
It's not about being less than or better than. It's about honoring both experiences.
Yes.
And so I say that to say, while a lot of what we're talking about might feel really loaded or even activating for some of you hearing this, it's like, I have not taken these directions lightly. I have stayed humble to the best of my human abilities as I have navigated these lanes and lines. And yes, there's always still more work to do and more grounding and more clearing, and we're human. But I just really want to say that humility is not a dirty thing. We actually really need it right now.
Yes.
We really need it right now.
Yes.
And we really need empathy consciousness. There's also this misnomer around Aquarius being like unity consciousness, and we are all one. And I even see a lot of the spiritual people that are like trying to find the best way to describe this population of people, because I'm trying to be very kind and clear here. But people that I think are struggling with the humility piece, I'll just put it that way, or at least the way that I explained it, and are, oh my gosh, I totally lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Like seeing they're better than because they're going this path
Oh,
of the
thank
consciousness.
you. Yeah, thank you.
The collective.
The unity consciousness piece.
Yes.
So they're bypassing other people's human experience
Yes.
is what's happening. And so by doing that, they are not honoring the individual. And Aquarius is really about individuality, but the beauty of the purity of love in Aquarius, like when Aquarius is in its pure loving form, it's actually, how do we honor the differences in individuals within community? How does the community witness that and honor that? Right. And
so it's not one or the other. Do you pick community? Do you pick individuality?
Right.
It's actually both.
And it's also not, we are all one with color blindness, right?
100%.
It's not, we are all one, and I'm not going to honor that you have differences than me. And so then I'm just going to ignore you and not support your strengths or your weaknesses or whatever. Right. Yeah.
And it's back to that wisdom of there's diversity for a reason.
Yes.
Including different perspectives.
Yes.
And that was the big thing that I've been sitting with in other spaces that I hold guidance for, in the sense of so many liberals have been so angry. So angry. Oh my God, this X, Y, Z. They're so stupid, or this judgment. And I just sat there and I was, prior to this new administration, there was still violence happening. We were funding the genocides that were happening, right? Please don't point a finger without, again, holding ourselves accountable.
Yeah.
So back to that piece, I think it's really important of, I am no better than you. Or worse, same as. We are in this lived experience, sharing space together, right?
Yeah.
Including the animals that we should be respecting as well as equal to us, right? So when we center our as better than or less than, right, over the earth, we see the imbalance, right? So it's, again, how do we zoom out, get the larger picture, and then zoom back in and integrate it in our lives? Everything matters. There's value in the conflict, right? As long as we don't harm each other, we learn from each other, right? And respect that there can be differences. but I cannot control another human being's path
Yeah.
or their life because that is none of my business.
Yeah.
They have a right to exist and live just like me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to your point too, Judy, we have bypassed the earth also.
100%.
So we called to start healing the earth and these energy lines that hold trauma. One of the ways we started to do that, we explained to you in Salem, but a very simple way is to leave offerings. I often carry a little bag of herbs that have meaning for me, and that could be a whole other podcast or but hold meaning for me. And then I will leave some of those at those sites just to offer some love and some honor. And so they're like very simple ways that can take you a minute to do that aren't day-long ceremonies or rituals, as amazing as those are as well. My point is, I think sometimes we can bite off more than we can chew. And so just reminding you that like drops here and there, a minute here and there, a deep breath here and there, I think can take us much further than we give credit for a lot of the time.
So I'm like, so here's a little drop and offering for you. Joining us in this conversation.
Maybe
Or-
a puddle.
Yeah, I know. You're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. And you don't have to do it alone. And yeah, thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for honoring my story and being along for the ride. And thank you to each of you that are listening, because I know you're here because you're feeling some call, some activation, some resonance. And I'm grateful for that, because that's what we need now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah.
We need you.
Thank you.
Take care.